Unlimited respawns in Star Citizen might be over. That new sneak peek, I need to recharge, it isn't just a prop. It might be the first sign that death could finally matter. With the Apollo arriving in patch 4.3.1 and med beds possibly tied to resources, revives might no longer be infinite. This could be the first real step toward Death of a Spaceman, the system Chris Roberts promised would one day make every life and every death count. Star Citizen's medical gameplay has come a long way, but in patch 4.3, it's still relatively shallow. Right now, if you get hurt, you've got a few predictable tools. You've got the multi-tool with a medical attachment, the dedicated Cure Life med gun, and a tiered system of healing that determines how much can be treated in the field. Minor wounds can be patched up with personal med pens, while broken bones, organ damage, and more serious trauma require medical beds of increasing quality. And then there's regeneration. Today, players can set their respawn location to any station, landing zone, or ship with a medical bed, regardless of tier. Die in combat, crash a ship, or bleed out from an injury, and you'll wake up back in that bed. Sometimes seconds later, as if nothing really happened. To make things worse or better, depending on how you want to look at it, you don't lose your equipped armor or weapons, but you do lose expendables like extra magazines, med pens, grenades, or other supplies carried in your backpack, chest, or leg slots. Death really feels like a mild inconvenience than an actual setback. And that's really the heart of the problem. Respawning in Star Citizen feels cheap. There's no real weight to it. Unlimited revives strip away the tension from firefights and remove the dread that comes along with knowing you could lose something permanent. For a game built on immersion, realism, and consequence, the current system undercuts its own design philosophy. And here's where things get really interesting. The lore already tells us that this is temporary. The Regen Crisis proved that regeneration isn't perfect. Imprints, which are the digital copy of your consciousness, can fail. They degrade over time, especially if you die violently, leaving scars that never fade, or in the worst case, causing total imprint failure. This is the foundation for the system Chris Roberts outlined years ago, Death of a Spaceman. The idea that death will one day carry real consequences, from permanent injuries to eventually running out of viable imprints altogether. That's why I think the latest sneak peek is so important. I need to recharge. 4 words attached to a medical prop hint at the very first brick being laid. Maybe it means consumables will soon be required to heal or revive. Maybe it's a simple power cycle dynamic. But whatever the case, it signals change. A shift away from infinite respawns and maybe towards something finite. Something that makes survival matter again. And if that's the direction CIG is headed, we're looking at a fundamental change to how players experience life and death in the verse. By the way, if you want to stay on top of these systems as they evolve, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've been covering medical gameplay, regeneration, and all things Star Citizen for years, and the next few updates could be the most important ones yet. So let's start with the most obvious change hinted at by I need to recharge. Right now, medical beds are infinite machines. Once you set your regen point, you can keep respawning with no real cost, beyond losing a few consumables in your backpack. But imagine if those beds required actual resources, like the regeneration serum or charges tied directly to an Ibrahim Sphere. Suddenly, every revival comes with a cost. Ships and outposts wouldn't just need fuel and ammo, they'd need medical stockpiles as well. That creates a whole new supply chain. And the moment supply chains come into play, death is no longer a quick reset. It becomes a logistical question. Do you have the resources to bring someone back again? Or do you run out, leaving them with no option but a long trip back to your location? But let's be real, if CIG simply lets us shove unlimited regen supplies into a cargo hold, players will inevitably stockpile thousands of units and the system breaks on day one. That's why a smarter approach is limiting revival resources to medical facilities themselves. Ships like the Polaris, Starlancer TAC, Carrack, Idris, or Apollo would have a finite storage grid tied directly to its med bays. Once those charges are gone, the ship can't revive anyone else until it's resupplied. Now that forces actual logistics. Medical ships need support. Stations become resupply hubs, and piracy has a whole new angle. And this naturally connects to the dynamic economy that's still on the horizon. Because if reviving consumes resources, someone has to produce them. That's why the Apollo's arrival in patch 4.3.1 is so important. It's the first ship designed from the ground up solely around medical gameplay, and not just a variant. If medbeds are moving toward a finite model, the Apollo is the perfect test case. It shouldn't just be a flying respawn factory. It needs to feel like a ship with real limits. Maybe each bed carries a handful of revives before recharging or resupplying. Maybe players need to physically slot consumables into the system. Whatever the implementation, the Apollo sets the tone. If it's balanced well, it could redefine how we look at medical gameplay entirely. If it's too lenient, it risks becoming another loophole where groups never really truly face loss. The September release might show us which path CIG is taking. And here's where it gets bigger, because CIG has already said more medical updates are planned, though we don't know when, but that leaves room for depth beyond just recharges. We might be talking advanced triage systems, field surgery, and maybe even crew roles that go beyond just press F on a bed. Imagine if doctors could stabilize imprint data, slow degradation, or manage a patient's trauma response. Now, these aren't features coming tomorrow, but the sneak peek makes it clear that we're inching closer to the layered medical gameplay CIG has been promising for years. Now let's talk about something subtle that most players have noticed but rarely question: the slots built into medical beds. They've always looked like drive slots, and in the recent sneak peek, we actually saw what appear to be drives slotted into these ports. Now that could be more than just detail. What if these drives contain your imprint, or define how many regenerations the bed can perform? If so, your very existence in the verse might one day depend on a physical drive plugged into a machine, at least for respawning into ships. If that drive is removed, you could lose that respawn location. It's speculation, yes, but the sneak peek gives us our first real hint at what med beds might become in the future, and how resources might be used to use them. One thing I'd really like to see CIG do is gamify respawn locations. Right now you can set any ship with medical beds, the station, or landing zone as your regen point. That works, but it could go further. Imagine being able to choose: respawn in your ship closer to the fight but with limited revives, or return to a station with more safety, but at the cost of time and distance. That choice alone would add weight to death and strategy to group planning. It doesn't need to be punishing, just meaningful. And meaningful is exactly what medical gameplay needs. And this is where things split. Ships, they almost certainly need to be limited. Each bed should only revive a handful of times before it needs to be recharged or restocked. Stations and landing zones, though, are the safety net. These will likely remain unlimited, unless your imprint viability score drops too low, or you've taken so much trauma that your digital self can't be rebuilt. That balance keeps solo players and casuals from being locked out, while making ship-based revives meaningful. Unlimited station respawns for safety, finite ship respawns for tension. It's a middle ground that makes sense both for gameplay and lore. Now, if you're wondering where I'm getting all of this information for the future of medical gameplay, you can check on the link in the description, which shows you the Lore Maker's Guide for Regeneration, the very document that shows us what CIG is planning. But what happens when law and order break down? Well, this is where things get really interesting, because once hacking gameplay matures, criminals might be able to corrupt or delete imprints entirely. Imagine getting killed in Pyro, only to find your imprint hacked and wiped from the system. In that moment, your character is gone. You'd roll a new one, and all of your ships, gear, and assets would transfer over, but depending on how CIG balances Death of a Spaceman, you might lose some reputation, gear, or even progress tied to that old identity. Now that would sting, but in my opinion, it's fair. It preserves your investments while making the loss of a character feel meaningful. At this point, we can't say exactly how it will look, as many of CIG's older plans have evolved as the game has grown. But one thing is for certain, Outlaw Space will be terrifying. This sneak peek might look small, just a recharge prompt on a medical prop. But in reality, it could be the first brick in building one of the most ambitious systems that Chris Roberts ever promised, Death of a Spaceman. For years, the conversation has been theory. Players speculated, lore hinted, and CIG dropped small breadcrumbs through things like the Regen Crisis. But now, for the first time, we may be seeing the groundwork put in place inside the game itself. Beds that require resources, med slots that show actual drives, revives that aren't free. All of it points to a design philosophy where death is no longer a reset button, but a meaningful moment. And when insurance ties into this fully, death becomes even more layered. Imagine losing your ship in an asteroid belt. Your character fully dies, and you're forced to create a new one. That new character could track back to where you died, loot your old body, recover items, and even patch up your ship with just a multi-tool, enough to limp it back to a station and restore it to 100%. It means death doesn't erase everything, but forces you to fight for what you lost. In my honest opinion, that's the entire point of Star Citizen. Your choices really mattering, where you fly, who you trust, and soon, even how you die. This system won't arrive all at once, and it definitely won't be perfect the first few times. It'll come piece by piece, patch by patch. But make no mistake, I Need a Revive is more than just a caption. It's the first sign that your mortality in the verse is about to matter. So where does that leave us today? Well, in patch 4.3, death still feels cheap. Respawns are unlimited, med beds are infinite, and dying is just usually a quick jog back into the fight. But the writing is on the wall. With the Apollo landing in 4.3.1, revives possibly requiring resources, and imprint systems being hinted at through the medical prop in the sneak peek, the foundations are shifting. Ships may have limited revives. Stations may stay unlimited but tied to your imprint viability. And in lawless systems like Pyro, hacking could one day turn death into a permanent loss of your character's identity. Piece by piece, Death of a Spaceman is moving from concept to reality. It won't be fully here tomorrow, but for the first time, it feels like it's truly on its way. But what do you think? Should Star Citizen push toward limited revives that make every death sting, or keep respawns easy and forgiving to preserve the flow of fun? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear where you stand. And if you'd like to go a step further, consider becoming a channel member. You'll get behind-the-scenes updates, access to members-only channels in my Discord, recognition of your support in every video, and even a say in shaping future video topics, all while supporting the time it takes to make these breakdowns. For the full backstory on imprint viability and Death of a Spaceman, check out my earlier video where I covered Medical's gameplay in its entirety. As always, thanks for watching. Fly safe, pilots, and I'll see you in the verse. Have a go.